And we are now recording. So thank you for coming. And those of you who have submitted some words, I appreciate it. It turns out that all of the words that were submitted will be covered in the next class along these lines, which will be a class on all of the Buddhist lists. So the 3 marks of existence, the 4 noble truths, the 5 skandhas, the 6 paramitas, the Eightfold Noble Path, the 12 links of dependent origination. And that class will be sometime in the spring. So we're not going to cover the words that were submitted, but we will eventually. All of the words on this list, and there are about 25 or so, I said plus because sometimes it's a 2 or 3 word phrase, are Sanskrit, unless otherwise noted. And Sanskrit is the classical language in India through which certainly Mahayana Buddhism was transmitted to China. And of course, Zen begins in China. And the process is interesting. Can't go into it at any great depth, but the Chinese were very serious about their translation of Buddhist texts, and they would send delegations of scholars down to India to study in the great universities there. They would study for like 10 years and then come back with manuscripts, and the entire translation project was scheduled at 200 years. So it's serious translation. And we'll talk a little bit about how the Sanskrit words show up in Chinese, and from Chinese to Korean, which of course is our school. And the Korean Buddhist vocabulary is entirely Chinese. The words are the same. The pronunciation is different, and that's about the only difference. So we're really dealing with Sanskrit and Chinese. And Japanese, I have a few Japanese Zen words just because you come across them in reading. And same situation there. None of these languages are related to each other at all. So Sanskrit is an Indo-European language like English and Latin and Greek and a whole lot of other, well, European languages. Chinese is not related to Indo-European at all. Japanese is a language isolate, not related to anything. And Korean is a language isolate, not related to anything, except maybe an island here or there. There might be some dialect spoken. So we are going to refer to the Sanskrit etymology, and that's what's in right behind the entry. And I apologize for my typos. I left off the T on enlightenment. I now see, and pretty much accords with the original meaning of the word in Sanskrit, but it's not as simple as that, really. If you look up any Sanskrit word in any Sanskrit dictionary, you see 11 different definitions. So it's that sort of language. The other Buddhist language in India was Pali. And it's the language of Theravadan Buddhism. So if you practice Theravadan Buddhism, you're going to be using the Pali equivalent of Sanskrit. The languages are closely related, and for our purposes, it almost amounts to spelling differences. And I'll point out a few of those as we go along, but not in a systematic way. I think for dhyana, I give the Pali equivalent and a few others. Buddha probably spoke a language closely related to Pali, and he taught and preached in probably a number of similar languages. I don't think we have anything quite like that today, but that's how northern India was. So let's get started on the words. They're in alphabetical order. And my principle of selection was, oh, this will be a good word to talk about, and that's about it. So we start with a phrase, annutara samyak sambodhi. which means unexcelled perfect enlightenment. And you know it from the Heart Sutra, where it's not translated in our English translation of the Heart Sutra. And if you look at our Korean Heart Sutra, you'll notice that you have that's the only one where it changes, I'm pretty sure. It's, annutara, samyak, sambodhi instead of sambodhi. Sambodhi, I guess, was too hard to pronounce. I asked Zen Master Sungsan about this. Why do we have this Sanskrit phrase in the English Heart Sutra? Because he supervised that translation. He said, oh, those words are nonsense syllables, don't mean anything. And of course, he just didn't know. I don't know why he didn't know, but he didn't know that it's good Sanskrit, and it means, annutara, the an is the negative, and the uttara is like other, like it's like no other, it's unexcelled. And samyak is a common Sanskrit word for like just perfect, terrific. And sambodhi, the prefix sam is kind of an intensifier. So sambodhi means really enlightened, perfect enlightenment. So I thought it was worth putting that in since we chant it all the time and it's never translated anywhere, even in our English version. There are a lot of words in Zen. You think of, a special transmission outside the sutras, not depending on words and speech. Not exactly, there's a lot of words and speech in Zen. The next one that I picked was arhat, and mostly to give the Pali equivalent, really, arahant. So you see that it's similar. Arhat, arahant. If you say arahant real fast, you almost say arhat, suppose. And it's actually the same Sanskrit base as Aryan. The Aryans, the Indo-Europeans, and Aryan, it just means noble. So the Aryans are the noble race, and arhat or arahant is a noble or a worthy one. And it's sort of in hierarchy, not quite a bodhisattva, but close, you might say. So someone who has had some kind of deep realization. I don't know who's counting, but arhats were distinguished from bodhisattvas. I don't think the difference is that a bodhisattva has compassion for all beings and an arhat doesn't, but maybe to some degree that's, the difference. Anyway, it's a word you come across a lot, the arhats, and mostly it refers to the original Buddhist Sangha. You wouldn't call anyone an arhat today, but you might well call somebody a bodhisattva, which is sort of entered into English. Almost as a common word. He's always a great bodhisattva, at least in Buddhist circles. That's about all I have to say about that. Atman is a very important word. It means self in the sense of a permanent existing self that survives death and perhaps gets incarnated into flesh, new body. So anatman, non-self, the an is simply a negative prefix. So atman in other Indic spiritual schools, such as Jain and Sankhya and Yoga, which was a classical philosophical school, there's definitely atman. And it's a very important concept. It's what you would call your inner self, your soul. And of course, Buddhism teaches anatman, no self, or non-self. And that's one of the, 3 marks of existence. And, anitya, impermanence, anatman, no self, and duhkha, suffering. So it's a primary word in Buddhism. If you have any questions in the sense that you'd like more clarification at any time, please say so. Avidya, not seeing, usually translated as ignorance. So it's easy to see the etymology here. Vid, it's an Indo-European root, Latin, video, and so forth. And is the negative prefix. So avidya means not seeing. And I think that's a better translation than ignorance. So it's not like stupid. It's not like low IQ or anything like that. You're not seeing clearly. That's avidya. You're not perceiving this world as it really is. And you might say that that is wisdom. And the opposite of wisdom is what? I guess it's ignorance. So ignorance is not a bad translation, but I think the etymology here is significant. So we practice in order to see things clearly. So it's one of the the three poisons. Raga is desire, and dvesha is misery, and avidya, not seeing. It's also the first of the 12 links of dependent origination. I don't know if we have any other of the other 11 links on this list, not many, if any. So that will certainly come up in a future class. Avidya, not seeing. So we can take bodhi, bodhisattva, and Buddha pretty much all together. It's all the same root. And the phonetic change from bodhi to Buddha, has to do mostly with the following vowel. So it's usually translated as enlightenment, put a T there, but it means more awakened. So Buddha is the awakened one. And the term enlightenment for Bodhi and Buddha is actually a 19th century phenomenon. Comes Max Mueller, who translated a lot of Sanskrit texts, translated words with this root using enlightenment. And it's okay, the light bulb goes on so you can see. The opposite of, you might say it's the opposite of, avidya, but awakened is a little more than seeing. So there's a kind of aliveness and alertness and, real, connection with the world when you awaken to your true nature. You awaken to this world as it really is. So in Bodhi, and we have simply the root form, and bodhisattva. Sattva simply means being, and it's derived from the word to be in Sanskrit. So an enlightened being, and from its earliest use, it has some notion of compassion, but that's something that actually developed over the centuries. You might say that the bodhisattvas. Excuse me, main characteristic is compassion for all beings. So if you wake up to this world and you see suffering, your natural reaction, of course, is compassion for really any human being. And we're in a position now where we much more aware of the suffering in the world, simply because we are so much more connected to the world through various media. I don't know that that's really resulted in an increase in compassion, but the potential is certainly there. So Bodhi, Bodhisattva, and Buddha. Enlightenment has kind of a Western cultural connotation of general insight into transcendental truth or reality, something like that. And that's, I don't think that's maybe implied in some way in Bodhi, but not so much. It's simply, you're awake, alive, alert. You're not sleeping anymore. Next is Dharma. The etymology of Dharma, it's an Indo-European root that means real, firm. In fact, You know, the DH in some languages would show up as a PH and therefore an F. And so the Latin firmus, which gives us the English firm, or is related linguistically to the English firm, gives you an idea of Dharma. Something really existent is what it means. We think of it simply as teaching, you know, Buddhist teaching. But, you know, there's an atomic table of dharmas in Buddhism. There are 75 dharmas, meaning 75 basic existence, basic modes of reality or something like that. So it becomes a real philosophical word. And it's applied to, you know, Buddhist teaching because it's a very, you know, favorable word. You know, it's the Dharma. It's real, man. This is it, the Dharma. You know, with a capital D. It's an important word in the Abhidharma. Maybe I should have that word here. So Abhidharma is the later philosophical and psychological teaching of Buddhism that really doesn't start to appear until like the 1st century before the Common Era, several centuries after Buddha. It's very scholastic, it's very philosophical, very analytical. Treatises, and it's in those, and so Abhidharma in that use means the later Dharma. There's the original Buddha Dharma, you know, what he actually preached, that's in the sutras, and then there's the Abhidharma, which is really philosophy rather than, you know, spiritual teaching, how the world works, how the mind works. And it's one word, Abhidharma, A-B-H-I, Dharma. And the Abhidharma is referred to in the Heart Sutra. So Shariputra, all dharmas are marked with emptiness. It doesn't mean all Buddhist teachings are marked with emptiness. It means all of these fundamental constituents of reality in this Abhidharma philosophical system, they're all marked with emptiness. So we might say the entire atomic table of elements, you know, is marked with emptiness. And all the energy forms too, yeah, and so forth. So very big word, Dharma. Dhyana is next. It means meditation, and I'm giving the Pali here, jhana, just so you can see, you know, some Pali every now and then, and you can see how jhana might be pronounced jhana. And when it comes into Chinese, it's not translated, it's taken over and pronounced as chana. Jhana, chana. And then that's shortened to chan. And chan means Zen. So in other words, Zen, the Japanese pronunciation became Zen, the Korean pronunciation is Son. So when we say Son Buddhism, we mean Korean Zen Buddhism. And there's no need to say anything more about it. You all know what meditation is, certainly. But it is an interesting process. And it's one way that Chinese scholars translated the Sanskrit sutras. And most of the time, they simply gave the equivalent in Chinese as best they could. But sometimes maybe they considered a word like dhyana so important, and it went any confusion and all, so it simply said chana, and you know, look it up if you don't know what it means, that sort of attitude. Then we have duhkha, which is here spelled D-U-H-K-H-A. The Pali spells it D-U-K-K-H-A. So that first H turns into a K. And of course, it's, the first noble truth. Life is duhkha. So in Sanskrit, it means unsatisfactory on one end of the spectrum and actual suffering on the other end of the spectrum. So a whole spectrum of, not so good, It is cognate with the Greek prefix dys. Dys as in dystopia, dys meaning bad. And quite a few English words are from the Greek. There is a well-circulated etymology of dukkha, which takes the KHA part of the word and makes it a separate word that means axle hole, as in a chariot. So the Indo-Europeans were great charioteers. That's how they spread mostly, at least in Eastern Asia, and not so much in Europe. And so they would be quite sensitive to a bad axle hole. It gives you a bumpy ride. Most scholars think that that's very fanciful, and that KHA is well accounted for by just the normal rules of noun formation in Sanskrit. And the KHA is a noun forming suffix, and that's about it. But you will hear this bad axle hole etymology. Nothing wrong with it. Doesn't do any harm. It's very colorful. That's about all I have to say about dukkha. No point dwelling on it. We can move on to gate, paragate, parasamgate. Might as well add the bodhi and the svaha while we're at it. Okay. So this too is in the English Heart Sutra. And it's in the Korean also, where the words are pronounced differently. Ajay, instead of gate. It's very interesting how different cultures have trouble pronouncing certain sounds, and so we'll modify the word just to make it more comfortable to pronounce, or possible to pronounce. So agate means gone, and it is cognate with the English word go. That's an Indo-European word. And it's in the vocative case. In the vocative case in Sanskrit, E, is the same as in Latin. If you know any Latin, you might remember the vocative case. It will always end in E. Anybody ever study Latin here? Only one person, alas.
A little.
How the culture has fallen. Anyway, we're addressing something, gone. And paragate, para means beyond, gone beyond. Parasamgate, there's that sam as an intensive infix, just as it was an intensive prefix. So gone completely beyond. And then bodhi, we know what that means, awake. And svaha just means yay, hooray, exaltation. So the question is, who's being addressed here? Maybe it's Avalokiteshvara. Maybe it's bodhi personified. So you can imagine whatever you want being addressed. And we leave it in Sanskrit. We don't translate it, and I think that's a good thing. Most people, figure out what it means, or are told what it means, or read somewhere what it means. Let's see, I'm going to be too much in the sun. So that's the other Sanskrit in the Heart Sutra. It's annutara, samyak, sambodhi, and gate, and paragate, and parasamgate. I included hara just because when you read widely in Zen, you read some Japanese stuff and you come across the word hara. And I say here, see tangen. So we could wait until we get to Tangen, but it simply means the lower abdomen, and we'll talk about it. We'll talk about it more when we come to Tangen, which is below. Hwadu is the Korean pronunciation of the Chinese word wato. And I notice I'm not giving the meaning here. Oh, yes, I am. Good. Word head. Word head. Word head in the sense that it's an encapsulation, a distillation. It's usually a very short meditation phrase. So word head, a short phrase, you might say, comes to a head. The short meditation, it's perhaps originally derived, from the notion of a kongan. So mu, for instance, the mu kongan is a perfect example. We simply say the mu kongan, and then mu becomes your hwadu. So it's a meditation phrase. So can't remember accurately which. The old Chinese Zen teachers, Zen masters really strongly recommended, and certainly in Japan it became the common practice of just mu. So Japanese students, mu, all day long. So we might say, what am I? Don't know. That would be a hwadu, a word head. And any short meditation phrase. I repeat, for instance, hwa om songjong as my hwadu. Actually, I chant it, but that's a hwadu. And Zen Master Sung San always used to say, you must take hold of the word head and not let go. So if you're using a hwadu, then really stay with it the whole time. You don't say halfway through, oh, I'm tired of this, repeating this phrase. I think I will space out for a while, or whatever, or try some other technique. So staying with it, staying with it, staying with it. And then karma. I think this is a word that's often misunderstood as somehow it's your fate or destiny or something you inherit from your parents. So it's kind of built into your psyche. It's my karma. But the Sanskrit root is kar, which means make, do, act. Let's just say act. And the ma is a noun-forming suffix. And it's the sort of noun-forming suffix that kind of indicates the result of the action, the result of whatever the main root is. So karma is sort of an act and the result of an act. So it's not your fate or destiny or anything like that. We summarize it as you make, you get. So everything you do has an effect. Everything has an effect on this whole world. And we know from physics, that's true. You wag your finger and that affects everything in the universe. It's all one big mesh, one big web. Sometimes the results might be very complex. They might be difficult to understand. Maybe the results are from former lives. So, if reincarnation is valid, what you did in the previous life affects, your current life. And, but it's enough to say, from the time you're a little kid and you start doing stuff, that stuff that you do affects the rest of your life. And it can get to be quite cumulative when you come to think of it. So like I'm 77, so I've accumulated a lot of karma. Fortunately, some of it anyway might be what we call good karma. So it's not just negative results. So meditation practice, is the sort of thing that we would say produces good karma. Of course, it might not show up until the next lifetime. So don't hold your breath. So only go straight. Don't know. Kensho is a Japanese word from Chinese, which is pronounced in a pretty much similar way. And we don't have any equivalent in Korean, at least not one that we use much. But it's very common if you read, Japanese Zen literature. It means to perceive nature. Give the Chinese like Kyongsong, Kensho, Janqing. Kensho is an initial insight into your nature. It's perceiving nature. It means perceive your own nature. So, we use the hwadu, what am I? Don't know. So that would be along the lines of kensho. What am I? And you have some realization. So in Japanese Zen, the initial insight is not as significant as a later insight, which perhaps will be called Satori. And we don't, as I said, I don't think we have it in Korean, but it's a word that you come across. So I think it's good to know. Then klesha, Sanskrit. A defilement, an unwholesome mental state. There are many lists of kleshas, and you can make up your own. It is the word in Chinese in the second great vow, Bonne Mujin Sowan Dan. So that's the second vow. We translate it as delusions are endless. We vow to cut through them all. That's a very partial translation. You might say, okay, delusions might, represent, an unwholesome mental state. It's one anyway, but it can also be more like, a psychological state. And, you can make your own list of all your bad trips. We used to translate, so in Chinese, it's bonne, at least that's our Korean pronunciation, and the Chinese is something like Shuang, maybe you can help us here, fan no, something like that, for klesha is how it's pronounced. Can you tell us, do you know what it is, Shuang?
From the pronunciation, I cannot tell what that word translates to. Let me think about it.
Okay, let us know. Klesha is the Sanskrit, so
I think it's pronounced fa now.
Fa now.
Okay.
I mispronounced the now part.
I see.
No, or something. Fa now. So which means something like a fire in the head or something like that, but headache is not a good translation, I don't think. But a passion, like a passion, a very strong passion. And that's how we used to translate it in the Quantum School of Zen. We simply said the passions are endless. We vow to extinguish them all. So extinguish, well, it's a fire, literally, so extinguish. I thought that was a good translation. But one of the head teachers said, no, people will think that we're not passionate about anything. And of course we're passionate about Zen practice, so we shouldn't say this.
Be like a compulsion?
Pardon me?
Like a compulsion?
That would be one. Yeah, but you have to make a long list. You can't settle on one. And I used to have one of the lists memorized, but I don't remember it anymore. It's anything that you can come up with. along those lines would probably be on one of the lists. I've seen many lists. So we translated it as delusions, which is one. That's on one of the lists of kleshas, delusions. And then so we vow to cut through them all, because you kind of cut through, this web of delusion. So I'm not very happy with our translation of the second great vow. I really like that fire in the head stuff, but if you look up klesha, I want to introduce you to the Princeton Dictionary of Buddhism. It's more an encyclopedia. It is 1,200 pages long. One of the authors, compilers, I should say, is Robert Buswell, who was once in the Quantum School of Zen, and I knew him fairly well. And Donald Lopez, who is a great Buddhist scholar. And it is terrific. And so if you look up, which I didn't, I should have, look up klesha, maybe I can very quickly, in the Princeton Dictionary, which, as I said, is more like an encyclopedia. Klesha. In Sanskrit, afflictions or defilements, mental factors that disturb the mind and incite unwholesome deeds of body, speech, and or mind. In order to be liberated from rebirth, the klesha and the actions they incite must be controlled and fully eliminated. A typical standard list of klesha includes the three poisons, greed, sensuality, hatred, aversion. According to the Sarvastivada school, there are 6 fundamental kleshas, and they are delusion, moha, that's the first one, heedlessness, lassitude, lack of faith, sloth, and restlessness. Then there is another list of 10, and then another list of, and so forth. So anyway, it's a tremendous resource, it really is. And speaking of lists, as we are now and were earlier, at the very end, there's about 50 pages devoted to lists of lists. All the different lists in Buddhism, besides having an entry earlier, are listed at the end. So highly recommended, the Princeton Dictionary of Buddhism. Okay, maybe that's enough about kensho and klesha. And of course, kongan. Korean from the Chinese gongan. In pinyin, it's kungan. I'm sorry, in pinyin, it is gongan. And in the Wade-Giles pronunciation, it's kung an. I use the Wade-Giles dictionary because it's easy to use for a Westerner. And so you will find different pronunciation of Chinese, and I don't know how many different pronunciations there are in all of the different dialects of Chinese in China, but I imagine there are a lot. Anyway, it means public case, and originally it was a legal term, like a case at law. And then a story, and in particular, detective story, and I kind of like that, because a kongan is kind of like a detective story. You have to see what's at the bottom of it, so. There were many collections of kongans made. So they are typically just a narrative account of a dialogue between a teacher and a student. That's the typical kongan. Proverbially, there are 1,700 kongans, and actually scholars have counted as many as 2,800 different kongans in all of the different collections that have been compiled. And of course, you all know what it is in our school. But I thought it was at least worth listing it here. A public case. A mantra, literally a mind covering or a mind protection. And so a mantra may or may not have semantic meaning. It may simply be syllables that have really no meaning, or it may have an actual meaning. And we have both kinds of mantras. in our school. And Dharani, which may have perhaps originally been some kind of code for some kind of teaching, and you have to have the magic decoder ring to figure out what it is, and maybe it was a secret teaching and only transmitted to certain students, and so it's in this code. That may be what Dharani originally is, but Dharani and mantra come to pretty much the same thing in our school. Dharanis tend to be longer, so the great Dharani is, we chant is, it takes 3 or 4 minutes to chant, but something like Om Mani Padme Hum, a mantra like that is, very short. And it's a spell originally, it's magic. It's a protective spell. And it's, of course, now become for us a practice, a technique, much like a hwadu. In fact, you could have a mantra as your hwadu, as your word head, as your meditation technique. So gate, gate, paragate, parasamgate, bodhi, svaha, that would be a mantra. And mudra, which means a seal, a mark, a gesture, often with the hands. So, this is a mudra. This is a mudra. This is in fact, this is called the dhyana mudra, the mudra that we use in meditation. Sometimes just raising a hand, if, Buddha teaching, is a mudra. And you've seen statues both with this and with the earth touching mudra. He touched the earth to bear witness to his enlightenment. And I think it would be presumptuous to use the earth touching mudra unless, you just attained enlightenment and you want to call the earth to witness. You got a lot of nerve, but I guess you could do it. Then Nirvana is, it's kind of a difficult word and it's understood slightly differently. The nir is a negative and vana is wind, cognate with the Latin ventum and English words like ventilate or vent. So it could mean no wind in the sense of everything is very calm. Or it could mean blowing out. So a wind that negates nirvana. And it extinguishes the afflictions, the kleshas. It's a cessation of duhkha, an escape, that's a terrible typo, excuse me, from samsara, which is coming up. It certainly is a state of utmost bliss and calm and peace. In our school, we really don't talk about nirvana much, as a goal. We think of it maybe as blissing out. And perhaps it has, that meaning, built into it. Nirvana. Paramita is a perfection. And you could parse it 2 ways in Sanskrit. Parama by itself means, the highest, the most exalted, primary, chief, most excellent, just by itself. And then you can have param and ita. So ita means going. So param ita is going beyond and going to the utmost extent. In any case, it's some kind of superlative, a perfection. And there are lists, of course, of the paramitas. There's a list of 6, and then another list of 10. And the list of 10 does not necessarily include all of the 6 and then 4. I think it might be slightly different, but you can certainly look it up. And it will be in the class on, Buddhist lists whenever we get around to doing that in the spring. Prajna is a compound. The pra is like the Latin pro, and so advanced in some way. And the jna is like, well, the Latin or Indo-European GNO, as in Gnostic, Gnostic, or Gnosis, Gnosis. So it means an advanced wisdom, prajna. It's pra plus jna. So an understanding of reality that transcends, another typo, two typos, transcends ordinary comprehension, prajna. So a really kind of special kind of wisdom. Wisdom is the best one-word translation. So the prajna paramita, to put these two words together, paramita and prajna. The prajna paramita is the first on both of those lists of 6 and 10 paramitas. Samadhi, literally it really is placing together. So the DHI is like the Greek root thes, as in a thesis is something you put down, you establish a thesis, a thesis, a putting down, an establishing. Literally, a psalm is like together, same, in fact, cognate with the English word same. So a placing together, in other words, becoming one. So like, you know, the mudra would be like this, you know. So usually samadhi as a meditative state is meditative absorption. You completely become one with the object of meditation. So absorption, are you completely absorbed? Or a one-pointedness of mind. So like you and your hwadu are not different. So it is a meditative state of becoming one. Sometimes it's associated with some sort of bliss, you know, samadhi, but it's not really. I mean, you may feel or not feel blissful when, you know, you're in a state of samadhi. I think it's rather a calm sort of concentration. And you notice that concentration has the word center in it, and con can be an intensive prefix. So an intense centering, you might think of, you know, samadhi. And how are we doing? Pretty good on time. So samsara. The sar is an Indo-European root that means like flowing. And the sam is, again, kind of an intensive prefix. And so it means like a wandering through, a flowing on and on and on through cyclic existence, one damn lifetime after another. And, you know, sometimes it might not be so bad. Maybe, you know, there are these 6 rebirth destinies. You have the divinities, that's the highest. And then the demigods, pretty good. Humans, yeah. Animals, ugh. Ghosts, ugh. Hell denizens, it's all very bad. So samsara is specifically wandering through all of these different realms of rebirth, and mostly through the realms of suffering. So, of course, the idea is to put an end to all of this wandering through all of these rebirths and all of the different realms. And it doesn't have to be literal rebirths. In one lifetime, you can experience all of this. In fact, in 1 minute, you can experience, you know, all of this. So cycling through, flowing through all of the different realms or destinies. So usually it's simply thought of as the suffering destinies, and that's its common use, samsara, the world of suffering. Because it sounds like the English word sorrow, I think that kind of conditions our understanding of it, even unconsciously. Samsara, well, that's not so good, you know. And then we have a native Japanese word, not borrowed from Chinese, Satori, which is, you know, awakening. Kind of a high degree of awakening. And I simply list it here because it's a term you come across if you read any kind of Japanese Zen. So you might say it means enlightenment. And then siddhi. There are many siddhis, supernormal abilities. These are magical powers. You know, all of you know the teaching of the Zen circle. So 0 degrees is, you know, the usual place where we're stuck. And then we practice some and we get to 90 degrees, which is kind of a philosophical understanding of Buddhism, maybe 90 degrees. And then at 180 degrees, maybe samadhi, you become one. This oneness. And then you keep going and you go through, and maybe you don't even notice, or maybe you do, and you spend a lot of time at 270 degrees, which is magical powers. And then finally, you get around to 360 degrees with it, which is just like this. Yeah. It's back to the ordinary world, but you don't understand the ordinary world the way you used to. So sometimes we have some stories about magical powers, waterfalls flowing upward and this and that. And we don't make a very big deal about this in the quantum school of Zen. In classical yoga, yoga as a philosophical school, not a system of asanas, which developed much later. The Yoga Sutras by Patanjali, which is 196 sutras in the sense of aphorism. Well, we're coming to the word. 4 chapters. And like the second chapter is samadhi. The third is just siddhis, a whole chapter on magical powers, all sorts of magical powers. So they make a very big deal out of it, and that it's important actually to cultivate that state because it leads to the 4th chapter in the Yoga Sutras, which is Kaivalya, which you know, we would understand as liberation, complete liberation. We would understand Kaivalya as 360 degrees on the Zen circle. So this, Zen Master Sun San used to you know, really talk about magical powers in 270 degrees, but since after his demise, teachers don't talk about it much at all anymore. You know, it's certainly not necessary to cultivate magical powers. Good luck if you want them. I mean, I've never had a single siddhi that I'm aware of anyway. So just an interest, I thought I would include it because of the 270 degrees on the Zen circle. Used to be paid some attention to, and now I think it's completely ignored. But anyway, that's the Sanskrit word that's behind it, siddhi. And as I said, very important in other Indian spiritual practices. Next one is something that is important in our practice, shunyata, emptiness, absence of intrinsic nature. Shunya means empty, shunyata, emptiness, and shunya also, the base of it seems to me bubble. the Sanskrit base of this word. And I really like that, bubble. So you have this thin film, you see a bubble, a soap bubble, say, floating through the air, and it looks like, oh, this is something. And it's mostly nothing. Yeah, actually, there is air on the inside. But I think it's a nice visual metaphor for shunyata. So, we look at our physical bodies and, that looks like it's real and solid. But physicists will tell you that, yeah, mostly it's 99%, there's nothing there. You look at an atom, you have the nucleus and then this, shell of electrons. And it is, if you take the whole thing, and that's what everything in the physical world is made out of, is, atoms. And it's a lot of nothing. And so, it could be that in early Indic Buddhist philosophy, there is that perception. So it's not nothingness, and that's important. And it's not the absence of intrinsic nature. It's not that. But it's the absence of a falsely, I'm tired of apologizing for my typos, just be tired of hearing them, imagined type of existence. That is the notion of sva, bhava, self or own being. So bhava means being, becoming or being, and sva is self. It's cognate with the Latin suus. The adjective suus, I'm sorry, nobody studies Latin anymore. So suus means like your own, one's own, whatever. It's an adjective meaning own, like your own nature. Sva bhava, Latin would use suus there. So that's emptiness. Of course, it's what the Heart Sutra is all about. And we have occasional classes on the Heart Sutra. I guess I taught one. We have no sense of time anymore in the pandemic. Sometime in the last year, I taught a class on the Heart Sutra, and most of it is about shunyata. So, shunya and shunyata. So, for instance, all the skandhas, there's the next word. All skandhas are marked by emptiness in the Heart Sutra. They do not appear or disappear, are not tainted or pure. All of these marks of existence, they don't apply. So skandha means a heap, an aggregate, a compound. It's more like compound. It definitely is an organized heap and not just a random pile. So I don't so much like heap. So the 5 skandhas, for instance, form, feelings, perceptions, impulses, consciousness. Form, rupa, means your physical form. That's exactly what it's referring to, your body. Well, you know that your body is an aggregate, a very complex aggregate. And so it's an insight, into the nature. Likewise, feelings, vedana, perceptions, impulses, our psychological nature, is not simple. It's very complicated. And so this idea of heap, aggregate, compound, if you think a skandha is just a pile, then maybe that's not so good. It's not as accurate a notion as aggregate sounds a little more organized. Like an aggregate pretty much has to have some kind of organization, doesn't it? Aggregate. A compound, maybe even more organization. So the 5 skandhas, and when the class on lists is finally taught, we'll look at each of the 5 skandhas. That's another list. And then we have tanjin, which is how we pronounce it in Korean from Chinese. And I'm not going to dare pronounce it while Chuang is with us here. But this is a recognizable spelling, is it? This Dan Chan.
Yes, in Chinese, this is pronounced as Dan Tian.
Dan Jian. So the Korean's not so bad. Dan Jian. Yeah.
No, yeah, I think it's pretty close.
Pretty close. Okay. Anyway, it means the lower abdomen as a physiological or psychological energy field. What exactly do the words mean in Chinese, the two words, Dan Tian?
The word Dan has a couple of meanings. The most common meaning could mean the color red, but also I can understand it as energy.
Energy, yeah. And red,
exactly.
energetic, isn't it, as a color?
Yeah, the literal meaning is red, but yeah, energy is another aliveness.
And the second word?
The second word literally means field.
Field, yeah. So energy field. Good translation.
So this is,
yes, energy field. Okay, good. So we always use that as meditation center. You know, we encircle our tenjen, you know, with the meditation mudra, the dhyana mudra, and keep our energy there. So that's the tenjen. And then finally, upaya, Sanskrit meaning skillful means, meaning an actions a bodhisattva takes on behalf of sentient beings. Remember Buddha's teachings as a makeshift raft that can be abandoned upon reaching the other shore. So you can think of all of these words that we've been talking about and all of the other words as upaya. These words are just skillful means, you know, to help us understand Buddhist teaching. So you can think of these words as upaya. But there are many, many kinds of upaya. So it's not enough simply to have compassion. You have to be skillful. You have to have some idea of what to do in any situation. So this seeing clearly, vidya as opposed to avidya. If you see clearly, then you usually have some idea of what to do. You know, some kind of understanding, you know, of human beings. So that's what upaya is all about. And upaya are to be cultivated. So constantly asking, you know, what can I do? And how can I help? So upaya is the how can I help mind, not just a question to another person, which is very good, but to yourself, how can I help this person? That's upaya. And so that's how we can end in just a little over an hour. Not so bad. Any questions that anyone has? Wenda?
Just that, I think you skipped over Namu, Sangha, and Sutra.
Well, that's not so good. Namu and Sangha and Sutra. Okay, let's do those quickly. Somehow I didn't print that out in my notes. So Namu is Sanskrit, and you probably all know the yoga greeting, Namaste. So yoga students always greet themselves, each other, Namaste. And as I said, when you look up Sanskrit etymologies, you're usually faced with 4 or 5 possibilities. But the one that I like for this one is that the na is negative, and the ma is me, not me. And the te is you, so not me, you. Very lovely, actually, namaste. But anyway, as a Sanskrit word, namu simply means homage. Homage. So paying respect. So it comes up in our chants a lot. And, you know, some portions of chants begins namu, then Buddha, so homage to the Buddha. And so it's kind of a humbling of yourself. That's why I like that not me etymology. And Zen Master Sung San always used to say, not for me. So that's a kind of namu. So, and then the next one was what else did I skip? Sangha. Yeah, okay, so Sangha means community in Sanskrit. Now, originally, the Sangha was, the community of monastics. First, it was just monks, and then later in his teaching career, nuns. And so, not simply all Buddhists, but ordained Buddhists, originally the Sangha. And then that continued, in China. You've certainly had many, many lay Buddhists, but it was the monks and the nuns who inhabited the monasteries that were the Sangha. And it really isn't until modern times, and mostly, I think maybe modern times in America. So Zen communities in America simply said, yeah, we're Sangha. So kind of took over the word and laicized it so that we talk about our Sangha, and it's not just the one monk that we have in the Sangha, but all of us. And it does mean community in the same sense, same general sense. And then sutra, yeah. So sutra, the etymology actually it's the same word as suture, stitch. So you know how we have, we talk about a thread, like a computer thread. So, it's a line of discourse, you might say a thread, you follow, starting a thread. So a sutra is a thread. The Yoga Sutras are literally threads. Each sutra, and there are 196 of them, are like a single sentence. And usually the verb is just the verb to be. There are hardly any verbs. So it's a thread, but it applies to longer, teachings as well, of course, a sutra. It is supposed to be, a sutra is, and most of the sutras are composed either in Pali or later they're composed in Sanskrit, which is interesting because sutra is supposed to be originally spoken by the Buddha. So the Buddha used Pali or languages that were very close to like local dialects of Pali, you might say. And all of these were written down in the next couple of centuries, passed on orally, and then finally written down. Mahayana doesn't come into Buddhism until several centuries after Buddha died. And so the notion that it's spoken by Buddha, something spoken by Buddha, becomes a little weak. And yet that's how many of them are represented. Others aren't represented as spoken by Buddha. Shastra is a word that you come across, a shastra. So a shastra is not a sutra. It's more like a scholarly treatise. It doesn't even pretend to be spoken by Buddha. And you strongly suspect that some of the sutras, they weren't really spoken by Buddha, but to give them a pedigree, thus I have heard, and so forth. So like all of the Abhidharma, for instance, all of the psychological, philosophical treatises, you might think of a shastra as a treatise, as distinct from a sutra. So that wasn't on the list, but.
Can I ask something?
Yes.
What's the relation between kensho and vipassana?
Well, teisho is a talk, and kensho, so I don't think it would be so much related. Kensho, I talked about kensho, right? It's so an insight into your nature, and vipassana is like insight meditation. But vipassana, is definitely a Theravadan, in the Theravadan tradition, whereas kensho is a Mahayana word. certainly, they have some similarity to each other. And so like insight meditation, so, perceiving your own, perceiving nature. But I think in terms of formal schools of Buddhism, that they're not related in that way, but they're similar concepts, certainly.
Hey, Stan, on the word kensho, you stated that it was perceived nature. Would I understand that as seeing, if I'm looking out at the forest, would I see the forest different, or is it like having a insight in terms of how nature works?
No, it's an insight, not into the mechanics of nature, but mostly into your nature, what you really are, what this world fundamentally.
Thank you.
May I make a comment in defense of Zen Master Sung-san?
Yes, please.
I think that he didn't translate. I think he knew perfectly well what annutara, samyak, sambodhi meant, but he didn't want us to get caught up on it. And when he said, "Oh, that doesn't mean anything," I think he was making a comment on getting very hung up on the idea of unexcelled perfect enlightenment.
That's true. But he said it precisely to me, and the sense that I had was nonsense syllables.
Okay.
So,
who knows?
I would like to think, yeah, of course he knew what it was, but he didn't think it was important. And in fact, it gets you caught up, as you just said, and a whole lot of thinking going on.
Well, could I ask a question about a word that I didn't send in?
Yeah, you might have an answer or you might not. So please go ahead.
Okay, the word's actually two words, and it's Tathagata Garba.
Yeah, so Tathagata means the thus come. So Tatha is just like that in English, that, thus. And Gata is come. It's like gate, gate, come, go. So the thus come one, and the Garba is the womb, means womb. So womb in a psychological sense, not in sense of procreation. The Tathagata Garba.
So I think, sorry. When I first came across this with Tathagata Garba, I understand it's psychological, it's not an actual physical birth.
Yeah,
but then I came to the Zen school. I mean, I thought of it as the birthplace of the Buddhas, the womb.
Yeah, well, what is the birthplace of the Buddha?
And that's exactly it. When I came to Kwan Om, then you used the phrase, the one pure and clear thing.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering how the two relate, because one pure and clear thing does not even make an attempt to locate it in a place.
No, you shouldn't locate the one pure and clear thing in a place.
Whereas the Tathagata Garba, there is a sense of location inside,
Well, in a sense it is, but it's not a physical location. You might say it's a psychological location. I'll think some more about it. You and I can have a conversation about it later. Thank you for bringing it up. So anything else, Tom?
Hey, Stan. So skandhas versus abhidharma, they seem related. Is a skandha an early version or predate the abhidharma?
Yeah, skandha is more of an abhidharma notion. So as I said, the Heart Sutra, when you study the Heart Sutra, you're right in the middle of abhidharma. Absolutely, yeah. So it's not an early sutra. I don't think the Buddha ever spoke it.
Right. But both are occur in Theravada Buddhism. Is that right? Skandhas and abhidharma, they're both kind of originate there.
I don't think so, actually. But I don't really know everything about Theravada. You'd have to look it up.
Okay.
So I just went to Wikipedia and I looked up thank you, Garba. And it says, I put it in the chat, an influential and doctrinally striking Mahayana Buddhist scripture which treats of the existence of the Tathagata Garba Buddha matrix, Buddha embryo, Buddha essence, the womb of the thus come one within all sentient creatures.
Oh, good. We all have one. Great.
So it's essentially that Buddha nature is within all of us, that we are the womb of the Buddha, each of us.
Thank you. Anything else? Okay, well, really appreciate you all coming and contributing. Thank you for that.
Thank you, Stan.
Very
Many
good.
thanks.
Many
Many
great.
thanks.
Appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
See you
Thank
practice
you.
tomorrow.
See you tomorrow.
So to bed.